Welcome back to the Parenting Wisdom Podcast. Today I have Bansari Shah with us, and I'm looking forward for this conversation because me and Bansari touched base about a month ago, and we had a great conversation about education and parenting. And we also read a book together, separately but together, which is called "The Obstacle Is the Way," which is about the Stoic philosophy. And we both really feel deeply that we can learn a lot about parenting and education from understanding the principles of Stoicism. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you today and just see, what our insights are from this book and just, how it implies to our life as parents, our life as our own experience as parents, and how it implies to educating our children. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and share whatever you want with us.
Hi, my name is Bansari Shah. I am a teacher, a certified life coach, a mom of two daughters, and I'm also currently the director of outreach at Acton Academy Essex County, which is a small learner-led micro school in Verona, with mixed stage studios and a focus on self-paced learning and Socratic discussion.
Cool. So I want to dive first in what it means, the Socratic approach. So I studied a little bit about the Socratic method. I recently took a course about Plato, which is a person who basically wrote down all the ideas that Socrates had. And there are a few basic principles for that, let's say, philosophical standpoint. So I summarized it in a few main principles. So the one thing is we need to question our assumptions. We want to reveal the unexamined ideas that we have and our beliefs. We want to be able to identify contradictions or inconsistencies in our ways of thinking. We want to define we want to try to get a precise definition on different moral standpoints. We want to see that we want to recognize our ignorance, and that is a first step towards wisdom. I think one of the main things is the dialectic process of this approach, where we understand and we learn through dialogue, and truth reveals itself through conversation. We want to aim to live a good life. We want to live well and transform our soul through rational inquiry and ethical reflection. And we want to always try to know ourselves better. So I think this is what we're doing right now. Actually, our conversation is kind of, it's a Socratic conversation, because we're coming in with a bunch of questions, right? But we don't have the answers for them yet. And the answers reveal themselves throughout the conversation. So how do these principles are integrated? How are these principles integrated in the Acton School, or specifically in the Verona branch?
So all Actons run through Socratic discussion. And the way that works is every morning we start with a 15-minute launch discussion, which involves talking about pretty big concepts, even for kids who are as young as 7, 8, including concepts like self-determination, moral dilemmas, and all kids are encouraged to participate, and every morning starts this way, a 15-minute discussion about big topics. At the end of the day, it ends with a discussion also. Often it can be things like, what lessons did you learn? How can we improve? And throughout the day, there's a lot of discussion. Even when history is taught, the guide, who is kind of like a teacher, but not exactly, because they're not teaching. They're called guides because their primary role is to ask questions and not teach answers, because we want the children to learn to look inward, or maybe through resources, but not to an authority figure for answers. So when a child asks a question, is stuck, first the guide will ask questions. Well, what do you think? Well, what's another way you can look at this? So it's really about building a sense of problem solving, a sense of empowerment that, hey, I can figure this out. So during the day, there's a lot of Socratic discussions, including in terms of how something like history is taught. The guide will read through a passage about, let's say, the Civil War, and then ask questions to the children. What would you do if you were this general and had to deal with this dilemma? Do you think this was the right decision that was made? Would you have made a different decision? So everything is taught through discussion, and that really takes kids into the topic. It makes them active learners instead of just sitting and passively absorbing this information. And it really develops their critical thinking skills, because the goal isn't necessarily to always have like convince somebody else what you believe, but it's really to learn to question yourself, question what you're being taught, to really think, okay, think about different things from different perspectives. So it really builds critical thinking skills, and it really helps kids learn to take a strong stance, which is actually one of the rules. Like, if you're going to have an opinion, take a strong stance and be able to defend that opinion. So it really helps children to become good at speaking in front of people and having a strong opinion, which is a struggle for even adults, frankly. Yeah.
So basically, you're integrating the Socratic method by having a lot of discussions and conversations, and having the teachers, having the teachers guide and not teach, right? By asking questions and having the children look inwards and try to find their own answers for questions, and make them active learners and not just people who sit down and kind of swallow information without necessarily absorbing anything.
Yes. And my daughters go to school there. My older one has been there for almost 5 years. And I see that even if we're working on something at home, which most kids don't do because there's not too much homework, but if we're working on something at home, she never wants me to give her the answer. And if I slip up and go into teacher mode and tell her, she'll be like, you're not supposed to tell me. I'm supposed to figure this out myself. Just, give me some guidance. And she's 9 and she's telling me these things. So they really over time learn to look inward, and they take pride in that. And that's a human, natural condition, to take pride in learning, taking pride in our sense of achievement. So we're really capitalizing on what is a natural state of children, to be proud of their own learning, to feel a sense of accomplishment when they figure something out themselves. It's really pretty natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, because, there are things that I feel are kind of like basic things that people in our society need to know. And I think those things mainly I believe that those things are historical facts, right? What happened during history. And again, history has a lot of place for interpretation as well. It's not only historical facts. But I do feel that there is a lot of power into to teaching children history, because it makes them understand where they come from, why the society is the way that it is, what are the mistakes that we as a society did in the past, and how we can avoid these mistakes. And I feel like sometimes if we don't kind of put upon them, right?
Yes.
Impose that knowledge on them, and just let them come up with the knowledge, then there's going to be gaps in the way that they understand the world. And of course, there is so much to know, there is so much to learn. Even an adult does not know all the history, and most adults don't know all the history. They know just a very small fraction of it, and a very short and a very narrow point of view of the history. But I do think that there are some main events that are important for them to learn. So how do you navigate something like that?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And I would just want to be clear that it's not that there is not some level of instruction. It's not just not coming from the teacher. They do read books, they do read history books, they do the math instruction, they use Khan Academy, they use Lexia, which is a really popular homeschooling program actually for reading instruction. So it's that these are self-paced online curricula, and it's in there, there's incorporation of history, but there is a pretty rigorous like history curriculum, which does involve reading, but also discussion of what is read. So there is a pretty involved curricula, and they go into different topics of history, biology, science, all kinds of different topics. But it's really more like when we're talking about more moral dilemmas, when we're talking about bigger life questions, we're talking about philosophical things, they really are encouraged to have an opinion, to voice their opinion, stand by it. And when they're stuck in a problem solving, even if it's something like math, and they go to the guide for an answer, the guide will not just be like, oh, well, the answer is 5. They'll be like, okay, well, how did you approach it? Do you want to try to approach it a different way? What's another way you could try to solve it? So it's really, you can still have that direct instruction through like khanacademy.com, but when you're stuck, the guide can help using a Socratic method, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And I think this also really relates to the book that we read, which is The Obstacle is the Way, right? That when you approach an obstacle, there are different ways to view it, and you have the choice whether to see that as an obstacle and just give up, right? Or you see that it as an obstacle and this is a challenge for you to overcome and become stronger because of it. And practice virtue because and show yourself that you can overcome an obstacle and you can respond in a way that is beneficial for yourself, for your learning.
And this is so important that you bring up, because right now there is an overarching trend towards lower mental resilience in children,
Yeah.
even younger adults. They're not as resilient. They're not able to overcome obstacles. They fear difficulties. They have a strong fear of failure. So the best thing we can do for our children right now, even more important than academics, truthfully, is build mental resilience. Because if you have mental resilience and you have a love of learning and you have confidence, they can reach whatever goal that they have, whether it's career or academic. But you really need to have those base ingredients. And the problem is that that's not really happening in today's society. Children are growing up not being able to overcome obstacles and shattering really easily when something goes wrong and giving up easily. So this book is so important. And if we start this young, if I'm talking about 5, 6 year olds, we start this young, by the time they're 10, that groundwork is laid down. And I'm saying this even from my own experience. My older daughter, she is a deeply feeling, sensitive, loving child. But I started seeing it at 5, 6, like, the typical stuff like, oh, I'm not smart. I don't know how to do this. This is too hard. That kind of stuff that you start seeing at a young age. And I worked really hard on developing that mental resilience, the mindset, a lot of this stuff, like, hey, mistakes are opportunities to learn. It's okay. We all make mistakes. You don't have to be a perfectionist. A lot of the stuff that's actually talked about in this book. And I worked on that at a young age. And now she's 9.5. And honestly, her mindset is pretty strong. And we're going to continue to work on it. And as a life coach, I talk to women who are in their 30s. I life coach women who are in their 30s, women who are in their 40s, and they're still struggling with resilience. Something doesn't go their way, and they're like, well, I guess this is not going to work. Instead of what he talks about in here, which is, of course, things are not going to go away. You just have to go your way, just keep going. And then it's not going to go your way again, and keep going again until finally it does go your way.
Yeah.
And that is honestly, that's the secret sauce to life. Just being able to tolerate failure well, because no matter what your goal is, you're going to fail at it a bunch. And it's going to take a lot to get to that goal. And there's this quote by, I think it might be Albert Einstein, actually, that he talks about how I'm not particularly smart. I'm just good at failing.
Mhm.
And One of my favorite quotes, which I'd love to bring this up because this was news to me, and I think this is something that I will probably never forget. And it's about on page 78, the book, he says Thomas Edison wasn't the only person who was working with incandescent lights, but he was the only man willing to test 6,000 different filaments. Now, I did not know this, and I was blown away when I heard that. And the next line, the author writes that genius often really is just persistence in disguise.
Love
And
that.
that's probably what, honestly, my favorite quote of this book. And that's really what it is. It's that just you're going to fail, 5,999 times, and the 6,001 will be the one.
So true. So why do you think that we have this lack of mental resiliency in our society? Where does it come from?
I think there's a few aspects to it. We have a very perfectionist society. We have where everybody kind of is aiming for the best of the best. And I think that's an interesting question. I think it comes from a little bit of my thinking is that a little bit of this hyper individualistic, hyper capitalistic meritocracy society where we're taught that if those people who do well are the ones who do everything perfectly. And when you throw in social media, what we see these beautiful success stories. We don't hear about the failures. We don't know that maybe that author in there to get their first book published, they had 20 rejections or maybe 200 rejections. You don't hear about it.
Yeah.
What you see is, oh my God, look at that author and they're like third bestseller. So we don't talk about the struggles. We see everyone's highlights reels, which makes it seem like everyone is doing so well when that's not the case. They usually worked really hard for it. They usually failed a lot for it, but people don't talk about that.
Yeah.
And now so I think social media really contributes to that, especially nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things that comes to my mind when we think about that is Jonathan Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, where he talks about how we have started to view children as fragile. And we think that we need to protect them, but we need to protect them not only from physical damage, but we need to protect them also from emotional damage. And we need to make sure that they don't get hurt, that they don't get disappointed, that they don't get too much distress. And it's also connected to the I want to say our trauma culture, where the word trauma has been kind of laid out and very easily used. Yeah, very freely used, especially on social media, where we started to believe that every small challenge that our children face can be traumatic to them. And that's a very big problem, because I think that if we always are in fear of traumatizing our children, then we don't let them deal with life's challenges, even with the smallest challenges. And there is the trend of gentle parenting, where I myself was very immersed in that trend in the first few years as a parenting coach, and I really dove into all the literature about trauma. But I think that it has gone a few steps too much, and to a point where we have started to parent and to educate from a place of fear and not from a place of empowering our children. And the constant, putting too much emphasis on how our children are feeling. When feelings, it's okay to acknowledge feelings, but we need to focus much more on their mindset. On, okay, and I know that this is frustrating right now. I know that you are sad right now. I know that you are hurt. And to acknowledge that, give a hug, give a kiss, give some time to calm down, but very fast to look at see what's the next step forward. What is the positive step that I can do right now in order to change my reality, to give our children the mindset of, oh, I'm not a victim. I'm actually an agent. I'm a powerful agent in my life, and my feelings won't determine my reality. I can acknowledge them, and they can actually give me fuel to act. towards the right action that I need to know to do. And this is also one of the concepts that he talks about in this book, about focusing on the next action, on the next right action, instead of looking at I have so many steps that I need to take in order to accomplish whatever it is. What is the next action that you can do right now in order to take the next small step towards your goal?
You brought up something really important, which is that there is a huge focus on feelings, especially like with the gentle parenting, all these social media pages from psychologists, which is wonderful. But what there is not enough focus on thought patterns. And the reality is it's actually the thoughts. So the mindset and the thoughts that actually create the feelings. So if you want a healthier, approach to feelings, you actually do need to focus on the thoughts, the mindset. What are the original, what are the way they're thinking about things? And there are lots of books, who talk about automatic negative thoughts, thinking traps, cognitive distortions. But this is actually not common knowledge. We do know that, okay, when our child is sad, we have to support them, let them be sad. It's okay to cry. That's becoming common knowledge. But what is not becoming common knowledge is that there is your child having these thoughts, like whether it's comparison, whether it's perfectionism, whether it's black or white thinking, all of these different thoughts that actually most of us have if we haven't done the work. If we don't work on that, then the rest is really, we're sort of missing the most important piece. And this is, he talks about that in here, where it's like the perception, and he doesn't necessarily go into it from a psychological perspective. He's not a psychologist, but what he's talking about is really the thinking traps that get us stuck in making assumptions about people. And he even says something about the fact that the way we think really shapes our reality. And there's another amazing book called Raising Mentally Strong Kids by Dr. Daniel Amen. And he talks about this all the time, that what you say will become true. If you wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to have a good day, you're already priming your brain for that. And if you wake up and say the exact opposite, you're going to have a bad day. And so my 9-year-old, she'll talk to my 6-year-old who's still working on this stuff. And she'll say, if you say, you're going to have a bad day at school, well, you're going to have a bad day at school. You have to speak your truth.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought up that while it's more to focus on feelings, there is absolutely not enough focus on mindset and thought work. And that's actually an incredibly big piece. And this is where this book comes in, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that understanding those cognitive biases, the cognitive distortion, is such a powerful tool in parenting, because we as parents can recognize that in our children very quickly if we are aware of the different distortions. And we can recognize them and start to implement a different thought in their head, right? If they say something like I will never learn how to read, it's too hard, right? Then you can respond not by saying, oh, you will learn how to read, it's not hard, right? Yeah. Instead of that, you can say something like, it's a process. Let's try and read this letter. What does this letter say? How can you sound this letter for me? Try to kind of focus their attention on this one simple task that they have in front of them right now, and try to accomplish one small thing, instead of looking at a whole big picture of, oh my God, this is such a big thing that I won't be able to achieve that. Mm-hmm. So I think as parents, it's such an important tool to have. And that is something that I think is not taught enough in our society, not to parents and not in schools, definitely.
No, so you're right that so if we are, as parents, we need to know what the cognitive distortions are. We need to start recognizing them in ourselves, because we will pass them on to our children, if we don't recognize them. And when we recognize our child saying something like that, you can use reframing, as you said, to change that thought. My 6-year-old still has to work on this stuff. She'll be like, I'm not good at this. And we'll say, I'm not good at this yet.
Yeah.
That's like a simple one, just using like the power of yet. That's an easy one to do. But or I made a mistake. I'm so bad at this, and saying, well, we all make mistakes. And that's another phrase we all say. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes too. It's mistakes are how you learn. So reframing mistakes are how you learn is kind of a theme of one of this book's chapters too. And I love his approach to that because it's really important when you do make mistakes or when you fail, if you get too disappointed, if you take it too personally and you don't realize that that's just normal, it's just normal to fail. We all do, we all mess up, If you take it too personally, it will stop you in its track.
Yeah.
Where, and he says in here in the book that the more you can just not be disappointed when things mess up, the easier it will be for you to continue. And that's a lesson it's taken me years to work on. And now I feel like I really can handle disappointment quite well. And because of that, if something doesn't work out, I'm like, and like let's say I do a live book club and like two people show up. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Maybe I did pick the wrong time. Maybe it was the book that I picked. Let's try it again, and eventually I'll have a book club that has 15 people show up, because I don't stop at the first failure.
Yeah, this is so important, the point that you're bringing up right now, because I feel like if we don't deal with our own challenges in this way, then we won't be able to model it for our children. And I personally have learned this lesson by working on this podcast, for example, because this podcast I started almost three years ago. And at the beginning, it was so hard to release episodes, to record them. It was like short episodes. And on every episode, I worked so hard and I needed to have it perfect before I let it go. And it was just very, very draining. But then I started a different approach and I started to interview people. And that didn't feel quite well. And now I'm doing a combination between interviews and solo episodes. And I'm trying to let go, releasing the idea that every episode has to be perfect. And it's been such a journey for me just to be able to really put my voice out there. It's very, very hard. And I feel like just because I'm going through this process towards, I don't know, some kind of success, I can now guide my children much better. And they watch me, I share with my children all the time. I share, the hardships of all this journey that I'm doing. And like I'm hosting workshops and people don't show up and it's just so disappointing. And I share that with them. And I show them how, I fail too. And that's normal. But I'm the next day I'm trying again. So I think that us as parents just dealing, setting a goal for ourselves and trying to achieve it, whatever that looks like for us, it's probably one of the most powerful things that we can do for our children.
Mm-hmm. And here's the reality. You have to model this for your children because no matter what you say, even if you say, oh, it's okay to make mistakes, they are watching and they are sensing how you are on yourself. If you are very hard on yourself when you make a mistake, it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to become hard on themselves. It's even a subconscious thing. We repeat our parents' patterns even when we don't want to. I mean, how many of us become our mothers, So, I mean, I love my mother. I'm just saying, like, in, different ways, we subconsciously take in what our parents are doing, even if they're saying other things. So we really have to live it. And what you did by doing this podcast, you did your own sort of hero's journey. That's a term we use at Acton, which is a way of describing the process of overcoming challenges, learning how to seek help, learning how to put your ego aside and tolerate frustration, tolerate discomfort, and then eventually get to the other side where you're like, wow, I did this amazing thing, whatever it was. So, but until you go through that process, it's really hard to support children well and effectively and like really authentically. And the best way you can do it is as a parent, try something new. Even if it doesn't have to be starting a podcast. That's an amazing thing to do, but it can be like, hey, why don't we build a birdhouse together? And I've never built a birdhouse. I've never even gone to Home Depot. Let's go. Let's make a fool of ourselves. We're gonna mess up and then we're gonna start from scratch again. And involve your children. I mean, one time I had to build a bed from IKEA for my kids, like a double, like a bunk bed. And I messed up halfway through and I didn't read the instructions well. And I had to undo like so many steps. And that was actually a great moment because my daughter saw me and she's like, "Oh, you messed up." I'm like, "Yeah, it's okay. I messed up because I didn't read the instructions well. I'm going to undo it and I'm going to keep going. People mess up." And so we have to model this by putting ourselves in situations where we're trying something new. And like at home, we have this, my kids have this running joke where I'm not great at making pancakes. And I used to be really bad at making pancakes. And I let them see me because I'm like, I'm going to learn how to make pancakes well. And this is running joke, like it's running joke. Like, Mom, remember when you were really bad at making pancakes? And then I'd be like, yeah. And I kept trying to make pancakes and messed up so many. And now I'm pretty good at them. And so
Yeah.
that's part of our story. And it's something as simple as like making pancakes. So try something new that you haven't tried that you're probably not going to be good at. It's better if you're not good at it. It's better if they watch you fail and then they eventually see you trying and trying and trying and then succeeding.
Yeah, for sure. So important. Yeah, and you're right. It can be in the very small things, very tiny things that in life, it happens on a daily basis. Also, we can model on a daily basis with tiny little things, tiny little examples that we encounter during the day. Um, and he also talks about the fact that we need to do our job well, right? Like if we take an action, right? He talks about doing the next action, but he says that we need to do our job well, and I think that that sometimes can be confused with perfection, right? Like I'm trying my best right now, right? And I'm doing it well. I'm doing it as the best as I can. I'm putting my efforts into this, but it may not be good, right? But this is the best that I got right now. And I think that's also a really important distinction to make between I need to have the final product perfect, or I need to do my best, the best that I can do in this moment. And I think it also reflects just like in general in parenting, because many of us, we want to parent perfectly, right? We want to be able not to lose our temper with our children, not to yell at them, not to show them that we are in a bad mood. We want to show them that we are always calm, right? And I think that when we start to let go of that and just be authentic with who we are and what we feel and reflect that to them, it really takes a lot of pressure off ourselves. And knowing that I'm doing my best right now as a parent and I'm always trying to grow. Like I'm doing my best, but I'm always trying to grow. And I think that's going back to Socrates. He always thought that there is the story of the cave, the allegory of the cave by Plato, and he talks about how there is the cave where people are in the cave and they don't see the real reality, but there is one person that is able to walk outside of the cave and to see the truth, the real world outside of the cave. So it's the idea that there is that perfection out there, and we always have to strive towards that perfection. We will never get there. We will always be in the middle between the cave and that perfect world outside. And I think that this is a really important idea because it's the idea that there is a moral compass that we are aiming towards. Like we are aiming towards the good. We're aiming towards the perfect, right? To be a good person, to be a moral person, to be a virtuous person. We will never quite get there, but it's always our North Star. We're always going to be trying our best to get there, and knowing that um, that we will never be perfect. And I think that also that is lacking in our society right now, because there is this notion in our society that everything goes, right? This person, the way that this person lives is okay, and the way that this person lives is okay. And we should respect all people, but we should know as parents that there is a way that is good, and the way that is good is our values, what we believe is good, and we need to guide our children towards that good. We need to be able to show them, well, this is a right decision, and this is not a right decision. This is a wrong decision. There is such thing as right or wrong
Yes.
decisions.
Yeah. And along with what you said in terms of values, if we want our children to really absorb our values versus like their peers' values or social media's values or all these other influences that are vying for their attention, then the best thing we could do, and this comes from Gabor Mate's book, How to Hold On to Your Kids, which is a book about older children, just focus on your connection with them, focus on your relationship with them. Make sure you're spending quality time doing things they love in a way that's joyful and not that's overly critical, that's about, achievement, that's just fun, and focus on your relationship with them and your connection. And that's how you more likely guarantee that they're going to take your values on versus society's values or these other influences. Because yes, you do want to make sure that you are helping guide them. And I think one thing you mentioned about not being perfect, I think one thing I would even want to say is that it's actually a good thing to mess up in front of your kids. Let your kids see you. I mean, we don't want to strive to yell at our kids, but if they do, it's okay. It's actually good that they see that you're not perfect. And it's good that they see that you lose control of your emotions sometimes too, just like they do. You're not this perfect angel, and they don't need to strive to be that way either. And they can have some compassion for themselves when they mess up, because look, mommy messed up too. And then you talk to them about it and you say, I'm working on this. I'm sorry I yelled at you when you didn't deserve it. I'm working on it too. We're both working on these things. So it's actually good that they don't see you always being perfect, because we don't want that to be their expectation of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing we say in my family is like, perfect does not exist. That's not a thing. It's just, you can't aim for, like, you will never be perfect, because that's just not real. And that's okay. And you start that by showing your own imperfections.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about my middle child, and my older son is the one that he had a hard time learning how to read, but it wasn't a hard time learning how to read. It was more the fact that he had a hard time that he couldn't do it perfectly right from the start, and he used to compare himself to me. Right. He thought that he was supposed to read like me. So it really discouraged him. And it was a very long process, but eventually he became a reader, and he's an avid reader, and he just basically he reads all the time, which is incredible. But my middle child is a different story, because he always thinks of himself more than he is right now. So if he was able to read a difficult word, he's like, oh, now I can read 8-letter words, or if he caught a fish, yesterday he caught his first fish when he was fishing, and he was like, now I'm the best fisherman. He goes to the other direction, and it's so funny, because sometimes I feel that I need to kind of like take him down to reality and to the ground and show him that, yes, you have accomplished this, but you have to gain more experience and you have to do it again and again and again in order to really become accomplished at it. So I think it's so funny how their different personalities require a different perspective from us.
Yes. I mean, every child we have is going to be different, and they're going to have certain things that are their natural strength. And for some of them, some kids naturally they're able to pass through emotions more easily. They're more calm. And there's some kids who are more emotional. There's some kids who are more prone to those negative thinking patterns. There is a little bit of biological difference in
Yeah.
in that actually. So as parents, we do have to tailor our method and give each child what they need a little bit more of, which is going to be different depending on the child. One child may need a little bit more of that reframing, a little bit more of that mindset work, whereas another child maybe need more self-compassion and the anti-perfectionism attitude, like or reframes. So it really depends. You have to really understand each child and a little bit on their psychological level, what's going on, and then give them what they need. That's the trickiest part of parenting.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I love reading books like this because I think it's hard to just know these things intuitively. Parenting is not intuitive. And and while I'm, talking about parenting, a lot of this applies to education too, because whether it's teachers, whether it's guides, but the people who are caretaking of children, and they are also doing a little bit of the parenting stuff, right? Like if a student goes in and says, "Oh, I can't do this." This actually happens in the youngest classroom. So Crystal is our guide. She is also a mother of many children, multiple children, and she is the guide to my 6-year-old daughter. And she says a lot of times she'll hear the kids say like, "I can't do this. It's too hard." She's like, "I hear that all the time." And her go-to response is, "Well, it's a good thing you can do hard things." It's like, yes, it is hard. So we don't want to invalidate. No, it's not hard. We want to say, yeah, it is hard. You're right. But it's a good thing you can do hard things, or like, we'll keep working at it. You'll get it eventually. Just you have to have these teachers and these guides, the people who are in the classrooms, they're doing a little bit of parenting too. And if they're doing these things like from the book, like if they're teaching the mindset stuff and they're in alignment with what you're doing at home, it makes it so much easier. And a lot of times, depending on, who it is, sometimes, or excuse me, or just the structure of school sometimes can be doing the opposite. When you have schools that really overemphasize, let's say, grading, like what grade you got, making like really you have to get A's, then you're inherently building in a sense of, okay, perfectionism, a sense of comparison, a fixed mindset that like I'm either an A kid or a C kid. It's one or the other. Which one am I? Versus, well, I can learn to become the A kid. I can learn to, reach my goals. So it really helps to have an educational approach that is aligned with what you're doing at home.
Yeah. Do you find that more parents are interested in like this alternative way of educating in the last few years?
Yes, so absolutely, there is a growth in micro schools as a whole. I think you've seen that as well. And I think that's because a lot of parents are shying away from a lot of the things that happen in a large school setting that doesn't always work for all kids. And that can be things like, there's a rise in bullying, there's a rise in, just people being aware that kids need different things. Like certain kids may need a little bit more involvement, a different approach, more movement. So as new literature comes out, and that's coming out that's becoming more accessible to parents through social media, through podcasts, they're now rethinking, is this the right fit for my family? And every child is different. Something that does work really well for one child may not work for another child. Maybe one child needs something smaller, more intimate, maybe needs something that doesn't have as much comparison, doesn't have some of the same things that some like hyper competitive schools might have, things like that. So absolutely, we're seeing a lot of interest. And I think, you've probably seen that in other schools too, that you've spoken to, that there's definitely a huge interest in alternative schools that focus more on real world problems, on critical thinking, on these character traits, resilience, grit, growth mindset, that are not solely focused on academics. And, at Acton, we're a really character-based school. We focus so much on character. And the reason for that is because if you focus on character, the academics and the career success will come. It will. There's so many stories where even in this book, there's stories of leaders who didn't go to college, who started off as like, janitors. And it's because they had the character material. Even if they didn't have that, stellar graduate degree from Harvard, they had the character. And there's so many success stories about that, where if you focus on the character, the success will come. If you develop the love of learning, make sure that they are confident, public speaking, being able to advocate for themselves, being empowered, as you said, and realizing that they have to solve their problems. Don't wait for someone else to. That's so important. If like those kind of things, if you focus on that, the rest follows.
Yeah. And I think it also has to do with just a few ideas that came to my mind while we were talking. It has to do with a few other things that I think are happening in our society right now. So one big thing is AI. And I think that parents are starting to understand, and also the students are starting to understand that what they are taught in school, AI is it pretty much is taking over all of that. Like you don't really need to know to have a lot of knowledge stored inside your mind. You don't need to have the academic skills so much of being able to search for knowledge or integrating knowledge or writing an essay even. I'm not saying that these skills are not important, but I think that students and teachers are starting to realize that the way that what the schools are teaching is in a way starting to become irrelevant because of AI. So I think that's a big thing. Also, there is a big shift in the academia. There are a lot of new alternative academic options that are starting to grow right now. For example, there is online universities like Peterson Academy and others that they show that you can have the academic knowledge without going to the regular academia, the regular academic path. And also, I think another big thing is the fact that there are so many kids that are diagnosed with ADHD nowadays. I think the number is one in every 10 students right now is diagnosed with ADHD. And people are starting to understand that the kids are not the problem, maybe the system is the problem, because it doesn't make sense that 1 out of every 10 kids has a problem, right? Let's just become the numbers are too big. And it's interesting because, in our school, in our homeschooling co-op, the Awakened Village, we don't have ADHD kids, not even one, and I'm sure that if these kids were in school, some of them would have gotten this diagnosis because, they have a hard time to concentrate and they need to stand up, then they're wiggly in their seats. It's hard for them. But in our school, we don't have any ADHD kids. All kids have the same expectations as all the others, even if it's harder for you because it's harder for you to concentrate, you're still expected to do the same as others. So I'm wondering how you see these things play out in your school environment.
So Education Week, it's a online, website for educators. They had some articles on how a lot of kids aren't really suited, or actually, let's put it the way you said it, like school wasn't designed with all kids in mind. Like there's especially for example, just for one example, a lot of boys need more movement in their day.
Yeah.
Younger boys, they sitting still for 45 minutes in a chair is just challenging for them developmentally. I mean, not all boys, of course, but this was just one of the topics that was brought up in an article in Education Week. And that's the expectation of school. So is the way schools are designed, is it really just setting unrealistic expectations on children? And I absolutely do think it's yes, I do think so. I mean, even to be honest, modern society has unrealistic expectations on adults, even working 40 hours a week, going home, cooking meal for your family, trying to, spend time with the kids. All of this is unrealistic expectations on parents. And that's why parents are so exhausted nowadays. And that even trickles down into education systems for kids. So there is an unrealistic expectation. And in our school, because there is what we call freedom within boundaries, we just see kids kind of get what they need because there's built-in freedom. So if a child needs to do cartwheels every 10 minutes to focus, get up into a cartwheel every 10 minutes. No one's going to say no. because there is no like, hey, you need to sit here, you can't get up here, you need to ask me to go to the bathroom. So there's not that much, there is structure. Like we do have in the morning, we do 2 hours of an hour and a half or so of core skills, which is the math, reading, writing. So everyone has to focus on that during that time. But if they need to get up, they can do that. If they want to be on the floor and study, some kids are, they need, if they want to be on a bouncy ball and study, like kids have different things that they need that help them focus. It's not always just sit in a desk. Maybe they want to sit on on a recliner, or like we have things on the floor. If get comfortable in what works for you. So having that built-in flexibility allows kids who don't always fit that like very rigid expectation of schooling, it allows them to thrive and allows them to focus better, allows them to enjoy what they're doing more because they're doing it in a way that feels natural and comfortable based on their own body's needs.
Yeah. So just so out of curiosity, do you have ADHD kids in your school?
We do have kids that are neurodivergent. I don't know the history of every child because I'm a parent there. So, but I do know those who have talked to me openly about it. I do know we have ADHD kids. I'm sorry, I do know we have neurodivergent kids. Like I do know that we have a child with dyslexia who's doing really well. We do know just other kids, but I don't know if it's specific ADHD. I can't say for sure, but I do know in general that there is, because the built-in flexibility, it does allow for kids who need that flexibility instead of the rigidity to thrive. I will say that though, if kids who need a lot of support, it's tough to get at a school like Acton, like a lot of one-on-one support, a lot of some kids need that to really thrive. That's tough at Acton, like a high level support. That would be a little bit hard because the model doesn't really provide that or have room for that.
Yeah.
We do have.
I think it's very telling the fact that you don't really know, about who has ADHD and who doesn't. Because I think that if we, it's not an issue, like, yeah, you may have ADHD. I think I have ADHD. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter because, I mean, and if we look at the child through that label, through that frame of ADHD, then our expectations are going to be lower. So I think it's so important to, I mean, okay, if you want to know if your child has ADHD, I don't even know what that is. There are so many critics that critic that diagnosis, that say that there is a wonderful book called ADHD is not a disease and Ritalin is not the cure. And he explains like in a very scientific way why ADHD is actually it's not an issue. It's not a mental disease. The way that we look, and there are many writers that critique that as well. So yeah, so I think that as long as we just focus on overcoming obstacles. And for some kids, the obstacle is harder to overcome. Of course, for some kids it's harder, for some kids it's easier. And for the ones that one obstacle is easier, the next one is going to be harder. Because that's just life. And we actually want them to overcome hard obstacles. The kids who kind of like jump over the obstacles and everything comes easy for them, they don't know how to work hard. And it's not an advantage for them in life.
It's not true. And this is a really interesting statistics that there are more CEOs that have dyslexia than CEOs that are graduated from Harvard. And the reason for that is the kids who do have a lot of challenges growing up, they build resilience. They're used to things being difficult. So they don't with the right support and the right mindset, the right way they're parented and nurtured by teachers, they learn to overcome obstacles and just kind of learn to work hard. And with something like a CEO with entrepreneurship, you really need to be able to be persistent, be comfortable with difficulties, challenges. And so that's a really interesting statistic that just goes to show that it's really we shouldn't shy away from our children being challenged, but we do need to support them the right way. That's for sure. We do need to show them that we believe in them, teach them the kind of things that are in this book about it's okay to make mistakes, progress over perfection that he also mentions here, that, mistakes are okay to learn, that, it's about persistence. It's not about getting it right the first time, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think, at a school like Acton, that's something that we really embrace. We do a business fair every year. And I remember when I first started, I asked the owner, I'm like, well, what if nobody buys my daughter's products? Like she made some like little magnets, and he's like, okay, then she fails. That's okay. We're not trying to protect her from disappointment and from failure, because if you don't experience it as a child, when you do, when you're older, it just stops you. You're
Yeah.
done. I guess I'm not meant to be a business owner. So he's like, that's okay. It's all right if no one buys the products. Then next time she figures out, like, why didn't anyone buy my products? Did I price it too high? Was it not something people wanted? What was the issue? So that's like really what one thing that I think all parents can focus on, regardless of what school they're at. You can work on it at home. You can try new things with your child. Try something like crocheting, which is like kind of hard, but like manageable. And you're probably going to mess up, but like do it with your child and teach them these things at home. It doesn't have to be, it can be through school, it can be through sports, but it can also be just doing projects at home, whether it's cooking and trying a hard recipe, messing up 5 times until you get it, making sourdough bread, which is a big challenge, but like, you can do it. So I think we can all work on this at home, and it's the biggest gift we can give our kids. Like more so than putting them in a million activities, more so than like, making sure they get A's all the time. Like we just need to focus on them being comfortable with trying new things, not being scared of challenges, and being really comfortable with failure. And that's actually what Dr. Becky Kennedy, I'm sure you're familiar with her. She says that the biggest thing we can do is increase frustration tolerance in our kids. Let our kids get frustrated, let them be disappointed, let them get comfortable with failure.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a great message to finish our episode. So thank you so much again, Bansari. This was amazing. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I think we had a lot of good insights. And yeah, I recommend parents and children to read this book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Yeah, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was a great discussion. And yes, love the book, and I recommend it for everyone.